My name is Manuel de la Caridad Medina Tapanes, better known as Manny Medina. I was born September 23rd, 1952, and I am an investor in technology. From the time that I remember, my childhood was wonderful. We lived in Matanzas, which is a province about 100 miles east of Havana. My grandfather owned several farms. Although my father owned a grocery store in the city of Matanzas, I loved the country. And I loved, my vivid days, I would literally go just about every weekend. There was a bus that I would go on the bus. As a young kid, the bus driver was a friend of the family. He would take me, drop me off. And in the summer, I would go the last day of school and spend the whole summer, entire summer in the farm, doing, riding horses, doing everything that they did. And I loved it. It was a very family-oriented. We'll go to Varadero Beach in the summer sometimes. In the city of Matanzas, it's very nice. Everybody knew us. I knew everybody. Went to school. So the first part of my childhood, it was just like picture perfect. And I had some very, very incredible memories of hunting birds and trapping birds and flying. The whole caboose of a young boy, really with a bunch of cousins that we all got into a good kind of trouble, right, basically. And so it was wonderful. On my father's side, they basically said there was a dentist that came from the Canary Islands in the 1600s and settled in Matanzas. On my mother's side, it was, they don't even know, because it was like multiple generations Matanzas. So yeah, we're as Matanceros as they are. No question about that. My sister and I, like typical brothers and sisters, we grew up loving each other and fighting each other. We still do that. I love her to death, and I still, she irritates me to death as well. So we had a great, my parents were totally polar opposites. My mother was a very strong, still is, thank God, is a very strong person. She still gives me a hard time. And my father was an artist, a poet, very gentle, funny, jokes, loved to dance. My mother was the extreme opposite. My mother was very tough. And so a different relationship with both. My dad and I were very, very close. He taught me how to fish. We had a small boat in a place called Puerto Escondido. It was a little rowboat that the most important thing he ever did was be able to put a small engine in it. So we wouldn't have to row anymore. I was a young kid, and it was great. I had a very close relationship with my dad. I had a different relationship. I have different relationship with my mother, but I got to appreciate her as when we came here. There's a theme with Cuban kids that you don't tell them a lot. Cuban kids, los niños hablan cuando las gallinas mean, basically. So you don't ask a lot of questions. So I didn't really know exactly what was going on. I was 7, I guess I was 6, 7. But I knew there was something big happening. Right at the very beginning, a couple of my aunts and cousins, they left the country. And we began hearing all rumors. As kids, all the cousins, some of the cousins left. We didn't know why. So that's really kind of, I would say, 60. It began to change. Then things really, really took a drastic change after Bay of Pigs, basically in 61. Remember vividly, because basically they actually confiscated my dad's car to use it as an ambulance, and so everything just kind of big, and that's when it began to change drastically for me and then I began to understand, not really understand, because again, it wasn't like people sitting down and tell you, let me explain to you about communism, let me explain to you about this. It just basically, it affected us, and the family was in chaos. My grandfather, who's a politician, was put in jail. So everything was very tumultuous, and I think certainly post Bay of Pigs. I have a very funny story that I like to say. It's funny now, but it wasn't funny then. My mother made a determination that because of military age, because of everything that was happening to me, actually, that she needed to get me out of the country. I always tell the story that, when people ask me about, how do you know communism was bad? I would love to tell you that I read the Marx Manifesto, and that, I went deep into it. And the story why I knew communism was bad is because this was post Bay of Pigs. I think I was probably maybe 10, 11, and the school that I was in, of course, they were beginning to indoctrinate, do all this stuff. And I remember getting home. I to today remember the hymn of the La Brigada Conrado Benítez, which is what they indoctrinated us as kids to, kind of like Fidel and the movement and the revolution. And I remember getting home wearing a red bandana, singing Somos la Brigada Conrado. And my mother asked me, what is that? And I said, no, I'm now a member of the Young Pioneers. And she proceeded to beat the crap out of me and basically tore off the bandana, etc. And I said, I don't know what communism is, but I know it's really bad. So basically, and from that day, she just didn't want me to get indoctrinated and wanted to get out, right? So it was just very difficult to leave. When when the opportunity came, I had an uncle here that went to get us. So she jumped on it. And then we decided to leave. It was an amazing. So they confiscated the store, confiscated our house. We're ready to leave. My uncle had bought, amongst all about a small boat where they were going to bring all of us. Literally a small boat, like with a 35 horsepower Evinrude. And luckily for us, honestly, there was a late season hurricane, and they sent them all back. But in the meantime, we no longer had a house, and so they kept us in that camp in Camarioca. They created this tent camp, and it lasted for, I don't remember exactly, but it was definitely probably 2 or 3 months. And then there were negotiations on what do we do? And because we were stuck in a refugee camp in Cuba, no longer members of Cuba and not able to get here. So they did a deal where a bunch of volunteers, by the way, I came on a beautiful sports fisherman, a volunteer from here went to get us, many boats. It was like a flotilla of boats that went to get the refugees that were stuck there in '65. Well, we got to Key West, and then they put us on a bus and they took us to Opalaca, where they processed us. And then my family went to get us. And then I remember vividly going to the Freedom Tower to get, our papers later, and then getting, the powdered milk, and my mother getting the peanut butter and the Spam and the whole thing. So that part of it I remember vividly. But we got here, and it was shortly before Thanksgiving. Of course, in Cuba, we didn't know what Thanksgiving was. And my aunt, she had this feast, and I said, man, if they eat like this here every day, we really did arrive at the right place. So that is a vivid memory that I have, what I'm saying? And then, of course, I learned to, but when I arrived here, for me, after the first few days, we lived with my aunt, and then obviously my mother and father, we rented a small little house in Liberty City. Arriving in Miami in '65 was very tough for me personally. And my early years here were really, really tough. Miami was changing. Miami was a tough place. I've always been rebellious. So basically, it was a tough place, not speaking English. People, I got into a lot of trouble as a kid because of that. The Puerto Ricans were beginning to get really angry. The whites were angry. The blacks, the civil rights had just passed, and then the Cubans were beginning to add up. So to it on free for all, and I'm there, and etc. So it was a tough time. I must admit, at that age, from like 13 to barely graduating from high school, was probably one of the most difficult periods of my life. Some happy moments, but it was tough. Yeah, my dad, they worked. Every day I get up and I thank him. First of all, for having the courage to have put me and my sister on that boat and come over. And number two is for all the sacrifice they did when they got here. My mother had 2 jobs. My mother, she was a hotel maid. She also worked in a shrimp peeling factory. To today, she still tells you that she smells the shrimp in her fingers. It's a true story. And my dad drove a cab endlessly. He drove really, so they sacrificed a lot for both my sister and I. I began delivering papers. I delivered the Herald in the morning and the News in the afternoon, Miami News. I remember The station, my paper station, was on Northwest 79th Street and North Miami Avenue. And my route was Miami Shores, basically. And I remember riding my bike in the morning, and I would see this, what I considered mansions, right? Miami Shores and the stairs. And I said, oh my God, this is like, how do you even dream of living in a place like this? And I remember it was an interesting time. And I went to Miami Edison, even though I had a lot of friends there. Some of my friends were not the kind of friends you want to have. And I got into a lot of trouble. I mean, basically as a young kid. And again, very confused, the whole thing. I had an aunt that lived on the beach. I was getting into so much trouble and suspended and all this other stuff and other trouble. And my mother made a deal with my aunt that transfer to Beach High, which I did on my senior year, by the way. And I transferred to Beach High. That was just, luckily, was enough for me to graduate from high school. But my mother, nobody in my family had ever graduated from college. And my mother had it upon her mind that I had to go to college. I didn't change, again, she's like she's the most stubborn individual that you'll ever meet, and basically. And so Miami Beach, things were a little bit better because I was already with a little bit of a different crowd. And then a couple of my friends had gone to Miami-Dade, and I said, look, okay, I'll try it just to please, to shut her up, right? Because she basically, because I didn't know what I was doing, but study wasn't in the program. And I always credit Miami-Dade College for me being here where I am today. It changed my entire life. Miami-Dade College, that's why I'm so grateful to them, and there's many stories like mine, right, at Miami-Dade College. Because I found for the first time a nurturing environment, people cared about me, it didn't matter, and where I was from, or, etc. Anyway, I went to Miami-Dade campus, North Campus, and that changed my life, totally changed my life. I went from that troubled kid to somebody say, hey, wow, this is really fun and nice, and laughing, and had totally new, different friends, and began really liking to study, and that changed my life. I just wanted to be in business. I like business. I began reading, devouring everything that had to do with, I remember reading all these novels and the $1 billion sure thing. And I said, I wanted to get out on my own. Didn't know exactly what to do. So I decided, I took the LSAT. I was going to go to law school. I really didn't want to be a lawyer. And I figured that the easiest way for me to get credibility, I like people, I like marketing, I like sales. That's what really drives me. But I didn't want to get a marketing degree because my friends were selling Xerox machines and Boros computers, and I didn't want to go that route. So all of a sudden it dawned on me. I said, CPA, yeah, I'll become an accountant, I'll become a CPA, and I get credibility, and I'll get started like that. It was kind of like probably in my junior year or something like that I decided to do that. And I did. I became a CPA. I went to work for, at the time it was a Big 8. I went to work for Pricewaterhouse. And the specific reason why I chose Pricewaterhouse, because they were very early on, they recognized how important Latin America was going to be for Miami. This is in the mid-70s. And they recruited a small team, of which I was a part of, and that made them different than all the other things, so I went with them. And again, that was the beginning of my career. I always say the best two decisions I ever made was to become a CPA and go to work for Pricewaterhouse, and the other one was to quit. In that order, right? Because I'm not an accountant by devotion. So I spent about 3 years with them. And then I started my business. With Price, I traveled a lot in Latin America. So I met a lot of Latin American people. And I spent a lot of time in Chile. I spent a lot of time in Venezuela, and stuff. And in the late 70s, Miami was going through a very big boom here. Oh, crazy. Miami was nuts, right? If you, I don't know if you were here, but if you're not, Miami was really just going through a big boom. And real estate was happening. And I had another partner, another very close friend of mine, went to work for Deloitte, which is another Big 8 firm. I went to work for Price. we both quit and we started a business kind of it started with my contacts that I had met very young. We were very, very young, saying to people investing in Miami, we will represent you the money. We will not take a penny from the property owner. We will not be a broker. You pay us a fee to look after you and in the negotiation, and setting you up, and setting up the appropriate structure, following up on whatever you need here. And that was the genesis of my business. It grew. I learned a lot about real estate because 90% of what we were doing was real estate, buying all kinds. And then I began by doing our own developments and began by developing real estate. And that's how my career, and I spent a long time, was very successful. Developed all kinds of projects here, office, residential, specialty retail, projects like Coco Walk, for example. We did a lot here, and then I was on a pretty fast rise, and at the end of the 80s, right around 1990, there was a big crash here. We had the most ambitious project that I had built is a 300,000 square foot office tower in Coconut Grove, which was anchored by a publicly traded company, and we were, at the same time, the economy here, there was a lot of stuff had happened, right? And the banks were going under, RTC, a lot, but we were all good until the tenant that had anchored that building went bankrupt. And it was a major scandal, basically, because all the executives of that, we had nothing to do with us. They all got indicted. It was a major scandal. So my career, when literally, it wasn't like that, but it was, pretty hard to crashing down, basically. It was my first major, once having made it, my first major financial crisis. And it was pretty bad. And so I went into, at the time, I had one of my main partners was a Lebanese who became a mentor, fantastic human being. Unfortunately, he has since passed away. And he knew what I was going through and at the time. And at that point, for a number of reasons, I was involved in just kind of getting out of that mess that was happening, litigation, just a lot going on. And he said to me, Manny, I've been in Kuwait for 40 years. My business there is big business. I know the Emir, I know everybody, and I know, etc. And this is when Kuwait was occupied, right? So Iraq, and Kuwait is going to be liberated. It's going to be a mess, and the country is going to need to be rebuilt. What about you coming? Because this is what I know how to do. What about you doing that? At that point, I would have done whatever, right? Basically, and I did. So I started. I went to Kuwait. I actually went to Kuwait right after the liberation. Went in with the Pioneer Corps with the English Army and with a small team from here, and began all the fires, the whole thing. I mean, basically, and I went to Kuwait to help rebuild the country. Which I did. I stayed there. In Kuwait, it was really the very beginning of technology because there was no IT department. You had to do everything yourself. And I've always liked it. It was also, in the early 90s, it was the very beginning of the internet. I went from Kuwait to Saudi Arabia. We got some very big contracts in Saudi Arabia. And so I spent about 3 years living in the region, going back and forth and built a big business there, while everything here in Miami was getting resolved. Fortunately for me, it was resolved in my favor, and I ended up, and when that was done, I disposed of my business there and I came back here. But by that point, I had already gotten the bug of technology, right? And I began consuming. I became a huge believer that the internet was going to change our lives. And because I just saw the power, AOL, the power of, what do you mean? I can have that Encyclopedia Britannica, which is what I use with my kids, and I can have it, this is going to be dramatic, right? And it's really, just to today, So I said, how do I participate in this technology revolution that I was so convinced was going to be so dramatically going to change our lives? And I began by doing what I knew how to do best, which is the infrastructure. So I began building so-called telecom hotels, which is the places where the telecommunications company come to house their IT, their networks, right, infrastructure. And that's how I started. The big jump was when Latin America, in the late 90s, there was a race to wire the continent of Latin America with fiber optic. Companies like Telefonica, like Global Crossing, like AT&T, 360 Network, there was dozens, billions and billions and billions of dollars were spent looping the continent of Latin America with fiber optic. The way it works is you bring the fiber optic through the sea, it touches the country, then the local providers wire the country. So the entire continent was being wired. At the same time, there was no exchange point. The internet doesn't work. If you think about the internet, the best way to explain this exchange point is like a massive airport. You don't fly, you gotta change. Without airports, the airlines don't work. And the same thing happens in the internet. Without a place for you to exchange those bits, the traffic doesn't go. It's seamless to the user, but it happens, right? So there was no exchange point for Latin America. As a matter of fact, as a test, we sent an email in Panama in a building from the 8th floor to the 9th floor, and it took 17 hops to Virginia. It was exchanged in Virginia to come back to the 9th floor. Imagine that. It was going from here to there, and so the industry came together, the telecommunications industry led by Global Crossing, and they said, we need a new exchange point. And it has to be a neutral. It cannot be another carrier because it's a conflict. Imagine the airline owning the airport. So this happened, and it was a very hotly contested bid. A lot of companies participated. We teamed up with a company called Telcordia, which had wired the first 4 network access points, that's what they call NAPs. That's what they call network access points. And we won. We won the right to build. After all those networks land anywhere from here to Hollywood, and they all agreed that they would bring the network to that place. That's when Spark said, okay, what the internet providers and the telecommunications company, all they want is a place to exchange the traffic. But we came up with a new business model, which is if you're going to exchange the traffic here, it really makes a lot of sense for you to have your equipment housed here, and for us to provide you a lot of services. That's where we began in cybersecurity, in hosting, anything that has to do with what makes an application run. Not the sexy part, the plumbing, if you will. And that's how it all started, right? It was 2001. And we built it. If you see it, it's in downtown Miami. It's the Network Access Point of the Americas. Today is one of the most important exchange telecommunications infrastructures in the entire world. It's here. And so we built it, and that was we took the company public, and basically became fascinated with technology. In 2001, went through another major financial after September 11th happened. Wall Street was out to lunch. There was a major meltdown. The bubble burst. Telecommunications industry imploded. So at that point, the NAP was just being completed, and I made a decision. When I speak today to a lot of young kids, and they all play Texas Hold'em poker, so I tell them, you know what it is to go all in? I said, you know what, I'm going all in, but I'm going all in on the technology side, not on the real estate side. So I sold all the real estate that we had, and then went in and completed an app, took the company public, and it was great. That was sorry for the long, because that's how I got, it wasn't like I had an epiphany one day, I want to go into technology. This kind of life drives you into it. I've always been very curious, and I've always liked it, right? So I say today that the universe unravels in very mysterious ways, and no matter what religion you're in, I am telling you, I sit here in my life, everything that one of these major crises has happened, it's always been for the better. And I'm a big believer in that. And absolutely, the worst thing listen, there were times when I was in the Middle East, missing my friends, my family, my kids, not being able to have a drink, not being able, working 17, 18 hours a day, getting that. We used to get, when the wind changed, all the fires were going on, it was like midnight. It became so dark. I had like the nostrils. We used to have to wear mass way before. And there was a time I said, what am I doing here? How do I go from Miami, having, etc., being, top of the heap to being here? And it was like, I tell you, and then you know what? It's the best thing that ever happened to me. First of all, I found myself, I spent time. I had never experienced solitude in that sense, a lot of people, but solitude because of all my close people. It was very cathartic. It was very cleansing, and it was fantastic for me as an individual. The company began by 02, 03, 04. We had gotten some huge contracts, so everything went really well, and began expanding the company. I had taken the company public in the NASDAQ, and basically began building this same kind of exchange points, data centers or network access points, all over. We built in the U.S., we built in California, we built in Virginia. A big part of our business was the U.S. federal government. We built in Brazil, in Colombia, we built in Amsterdam, in Spain. So we began growing the company. It was a great, basically to take a company like that from the very beginning and grow it as a multinational company, and taking advantage of that internet explosion, right? By that point, at the very beginning when we started, we identified cyber security as a big issue because we knew the guts of it, so we knew how vulnerable it was. So we bought a small cyber practice that then grew. That was a fun part of the business because we basically, through those years, cyber, it wasn't the issue that it is today, but it began being a big issue. We had a relationship with a company called Kroll. So in fact, they're still very good friends of mine, Jules Kroll. They were a security company, but not for the cyber part. They had the corporate relationships, and we had the cyber part. So we had the cyber delta force, if you will. So through those years, our cyber practice grew significantly. And then in the 08 period, it was the very beginning, 07, 08 was the very beginning of the cloud, when people began talking the cloud. We became pioneers in the cloud, launched it. As a matter of fact, in 09, AWS, which is now the leader, and us were the same, basically. So we were doing cyber, we were doing the cloud, we were doing all this stuff. And then in 2011, as a public company, Verizon came knocking on my door and said, want to buy the company. And the more I kept saying no, the more they kept increasing the price. So at a point, I had to do it, and I did. I sold the company in 2011, 12. So it was a very gratifying experience because it's the first time that I actually had, that kind of moment to be able to kind of stop and smell the roses. I had never, and it was great because it was great for all the employees, the team members that have been with me for a long time, stockholders, everybody. So it was great. And then it's, what do I do, right? Basically, I still feel very young. I'm very young, and that's when I started the next phase of the first thing I did is I had never done this before since I was 13. I ended up taking time off, taking a sabbatical, literally disconnecting. Literally, which by the way, it's if you've never done it, just really disconnecting, it's very tough. So I did, and then I figured, what do I do? So I started the next phase, which is, what do I really like? Well, I love technology, I love software, I love this, what is happening right now. There's so much happening. So I decided to do two things. First is continue investing in what I know, which is that whole software technology next generation. And I also came up with the idea of creating Emerge Americas, which is our conference, right? And it's actually coming up now in April. And the reason I came up with the idea of creating Emerge Americas was because it was very tough growing. People take it for granted today, but founding and growing a technology company headquartered in Miami was very tough. We got no respect. It was very difficult to recruit. You're trying to recruit really talented people to bring them down here. It was tough. So I said, what can I do to help that? And I came up with this idea inspired by South by Southwest, which is a similar event that happens in Austin. We had attended many times. And I said, you know what? I think the need is here. I think Miami has the right environment. And we launched it. My daughter, Melissa, who now runs it, it was the first person I called. She's called me crazy many times. So she says, you're crazy. And I said, yes, but let's do it anyways. And we did. So I did those two things. It began Medina Capital, which is basically invest, and then Emerge Americas, which has become a phenomenon. I mean, basically, the first year was in 2014, and we did it at the Miami Beach Convention Center because I figured if it's going to grow, let's make sure that we have the right venue. And it's grown. Last year we had a 2-year COVID hiatus, but last year we had 20,000 people, like 60 countries, hundreds. And the showcase of the event is the innovation, is the startups. There are thousands of startups that compete. We choose 100 of them, and then we show them. And then there's all kinds of family offices and venture capital, et cetera, that come to look for the opportunities and the money. So Emerge Americas, which was born out of really just a passion of trying to help Miami and the ecosystem here, has become quite a phenomenon on its own. So that's where I am today. The Medina Family Foundation is something that we launched again at the same time that we, after selling the company. We have two themes generally that we like to help. One is education. Anything that has to do with education, we help in education, particularly, like we have a school here that we funded that is called the Seed School of Miami, which is for, people on the welfare system. So anything that has to do with changing the trajectory of a kid, like my trajectory was changed, and that's basically one theme that we invest in. I like to help. And the other one that it's gotten me a lot of pleasure and I love passion with the ocean. So we basically invest a lot in anything that has to do with the ocean. So for example, FIU has something called the Medina Aquarius program, which is basically an underwater habitat where scientists come from all over the world, which we rescued. We rescued the habitat because it was going to be decommissioned and helped it fund it. And today it's become, again, it's put FIU in the map from an ocean point of view. And that's also very satisfactory because there's millions of kids. They teach, the scientists come and they live underwater for up to 30 days. And from there, they teach classes all over. So kids, there's, I don't know, probably more than 1 million kids that have already been exposed to FIU's Aquarius program. So those are the two broad areas. And within that, we try to do the best that we can. I have a son who got the artist gene, got it from his mother, and probably my dad, but who's a musician. He's an artist. My son is a musician. Very proud of him. I mean, you think about a Cuban kid, he's always been a musician. He was born in Miami. He's been a musician literally since he was 2 years old. He had his first band when he was in junior high. Then he kept playing, and they basically, and then he wanted to he wanted to continue playing in the band. Figure the Miami Sound Machine were successful, why could I not be? I said, here's the deal. You don't get a college degree, you don't count on me. I'm going to tell you what my mother told me. So it's up to you. You decide. If you get a college degree, and so he agreed, and he kind of only half kidding on that. But anyways, because he was going to go to college. And he ended up going to Vanderbilt. And from there, he went from playing bar mitzvahs and quinces to playing country. So basically, think about a Cuban-American kid from Miami becoming a country star, which they are now. Right now, they're in tour, on a massive tour. They're right this second, they're in Australia. They're going to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Europe, and stuff. So I'm very proud of him because he made it. He worked harder than anybody. It's not a career that I recommend for the faint of heart because it's tough. And to make it in that world is very tough. Very proud of Melissa, my daughter, because she's, unfortunately for her, as I tell her, she's got my genes, and she needs to succeed. She's like a workaholic, and she's become quite a personality on her own in this whole tech movement, and she runs Emerge, and so she's got 5 kids from 15 to 6. So it's which the whole gang was just skiing. We just took everybody skiing right now. So it's great. I mean, I'm very proud of both of them for totally different reasons, but the same at the same time. I like to think that I'm leaving the world a little better than I found it. That's what I like to think. Hopefully I'm not being presumptuous, but I do that. I do everything with people, with kids. I mean, I like to speak to kids. I like to do that. I feel that if I can change, even if I don't know about it, if I don't know about it, it doesn't matter. If I can change trajectories and etc. I mean, I basically, that's how I think that I can make the biggest difference. Since I went from survival to everything else, it's just trying to how do I pay it forward, if you will. And I think there's a lot of ways to do it. I think that once you've gone through what we have gone through, there's a certain comfort in knowing that you've survived that. And I think that has served me well my entire life. It served me well when I was starting my business. It served me well when I was in the Middle East. It serves me well every time that I've had a crisis. It's never going to be as bad. You know what I mean? There's always that it's never going to be as bad. And by the way, is it bad for me? What about my parents? I mean, I would never have the strength to put my daughter and my son in a boat and go to a country that I don't speak the language and I don't even know what I'm going to do. So I'm complaining? I have no right to complain. So I think it served me very well, because when things are really, like to your point, when things get really bleak and bad, and all of us go through some very bad period. Right now, right this second, last week was a crisis. I mean, I've been a client of Silicon Valley Bank for 30 years. All of a sudden this whole thing imploded. You know what? You learn cool and collected. You take the team. My daughter had never gone through anything like that. You get them through all together. You put them together and say, let's put everything in perspective, right? Let's put it into perspective. And I think that all really is, I mean, if you take that young, happy kid in the countryside of Matanzas, take him through what he went through, get him to the next stage, it's very difficult for you, I mean, unless you delude yourself to say, how can we not survive, basically. So that I think that lesson, I've tried my very best to instill it in my kids. It's tough, but I'm both very proud of them. They've both been to Cuba. They've both been to where I grew up. It's more difficult with the grandkids, even though I try. But it's a tough lesson to learn, and I'm very grateful that I was able to experience it personally.